Hello, everyone. I'm David Frangioni, CEO of Modern Drummer, and I'm very excited to invite you to today's podcast. A great friend, a great drummer with a really awesome story to share. Erik Eldenius, welcome.
Thank you, David.
Great to have you today.
Yeah,
man.
thanks for
Good to see
having
you.
me.
So here we are. We're always backstage, side stage, rarely on stage when we're filming these podcasts, and this is another example. So thank you for taking the time off the grid here on our Modern Drummer portable podcast rig. So, Erik, you're playing with Billy Idol. You've been with Billy for 12 years now.
Yep.
I've had the privilege of seeing you play. I've had the privilege of being a part of your rundown. You're a great drummer.
Thank you.
Perfect drummer for Billy and what he does, which is just fantastic, iconic songs and iconic parts. So I want to talk about that. And I certainly want to get inside of the Billy Idol side of things and the songs and your playing and touring with him and the new record coming out. But let's start at the beginning. How do you find the drums? What does your journey look like when, you first started drumming?
Well, that's obviously a long story, but I think it starts pretty much the same for everyone. You either break all of the pots and pans in your parents' home, or you drive them crazy, or both, which is, that was the case with me.
At what age?
Early on, but I remember getting my first drums around the age of 4.
Oh, really young. Okay, baby.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was pretty obvious even back then that, like, all right, we
So
if we want to keep this house intact, we need to.
we better get him a drum set, or he's going to tear the kitchen up.
Right.
and so you found your calling really early, and then when does it progress to either playing to records or having a teacher? Like, what happened next?
Yeah, all of that happened pretty quickly. We had some family friends that were drummers, and they would come over and, teach me some things. Sometimes we would set up 2 drum kits and just kind of jam. And I would, early on, I remember, putting on headphones and playing along with records. And I think a lot of people can relate to that as well, that's usually the first way that you sort of learn. It wasn't necessarily that I sat down with a teacher and hold your sticks like this or this. It was just about, playing along with records and trying to make music. From day one, really.
And your parents bought you a drum set at that young age, so they were very supportive.
They were super supportive, and luckily, I grew up out in the woods, and we had a basement.
And where did you grow up? Where are we now?
Outside of Gothenburg, Sweden.
Okay, all right, got it. Okay, so you're in Sweden, and your parents are very supportive, very loving, obviously. They get you the drum set, you start playing the records, and what are you playing to? What records are you into at this really young age? These are the inspiration years. Thank you for watching and supporting everything Modern Drummer is up to. Hit the subscribe button down below. It means so much to us because we can keep bringing you the best drummers and content all the time. And please check out our shop. We've got Legends books. We've got back issues. We've got swag. Everything the drumming community could want. And it's so exciting to have you guys be the best part of it. Once again, thank you and enjoy the rest of the video.
Right. So back then, it was mainly records that my parents had. So it would be the Beatles and ABBA and Elvis.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were playing to those records and you were loving it.
Yeah. Until
and they bought you a real set?
Yeah. Amazing. With a 24-inch bass drum.
Wow.
That's why I played 26s and 28s now, because even at 47, I've just been used to, massive kick drums from an early age. I'll have to dig up a photo and big toms, like 13, 15-inch rack toms.
Wow, that's awesome.
I'm like a little kid. I mean, I'm standing up playing, obviously, from the get-go. So
that's great. And so what happens? How does the journey continue?
Well, I did start taking lessons probably around 10 or so, and it just progressed, just in terms of discovering more and more music, playing along with more and more advanced records, if you want to call it that, and just sort of getting a grasp on what it was that I was into, which was basically at that age, everything. I just wanted to soak up as much as I possibly could, different styles of music, different drummers. and also different instruments. You know, we had, you know, guitars and piano and all this stuff around the house. So
You were playing all of it.
I think I developed an interest, not just, towards the drums, but it's like I loved picking up the guitar or sitting down at the piano, trying to figure out songs the same way that I was trying to figure out drum parts. You know, at that point, like I was heavily into more of the classic rock stuff. Even before that, it was like I was introduced to Kiss, which of course changed my life. And now that took on a whole other meaning. It wasn't just music. It was like this whole,
The show.
the
energy
it was the machine of the whole thing. And it was just like, oh my God, you can play music and do this. So of course that became the first sort of indication, like, I want to be, you know, I want to go on tour and be in a band and move to the United States and all this
So
stuff.
you're young when that's resonating. Like you're.
Oh
you're
my God,
still a
yeah.
kid,
My
basically.
neighbors introduced me, so that was all we did. We would just sit and read through, you know, rock and roll magazines, with pictures of Kiss. You know, I would buy posters, you know, get my hands on as many records as I
And
could.
they've been huge all over the world, but they were really big in Sweden.
They
always
were.
have been.
Yeah, massive. So I just became more serious about studying the drums and music in general. So that led to a lot of more sort of classic rock. I mean, I remember my teacher at some point, I may have been 9 or 10, because I drove him, my teacher, and all the other students by, you know, I said, you know, on the classroom bench, right? So he's like, oh my God, well, if you're going to do this right, do it right. And he handed me a cassette copy of Machine Head, Deep Purple.
Oh, wow.
And that changed my life. I got really, really into that record. And of course, like most people, you know, you have to learn how to play Smoke on the Water. Not just on drums, but on guitar. You know,
Yeah,
it's
of
one of the
course.
most famous guitar riffs ever.
Without a doubt.
So that record, and then that led me, I guess, more to bands like, Toto and all the West Coast bands that I started, you know, really, really getting into. And that led further down to starting, you know, to play a lot of jazz, listening to a lot of jazz. That's probably still my biggest sort of
And
passion.
who were the drummers you took from that? Because it sounds like when you get into jazz and these other genres, and of course Ian Pace with Deep Purple, they're drummers, right? So they're
Right.
not just iconic drummers and great
Sure.
drummers, but they're drummers. And who are the drummers you're starting to find at that point? 'Cause I think we all go through those stages where first we just discover drumming inside of music that we love.
Right.
And then we discover the Carl Palmers and the Billy Cobhams and the drummer, Buddy Rich,
Sure.
et cetera. So who did you discover? What were you finding then?
Well, given the fact that one of the first bands that I was introduced to and really got into were the Beatles, at the time, I'll admit, I didn't really quite understand the genius of Ringo and how incredible he is and important.
Yeah, he is.
And
Always will be.
yeah. And then, of course, with Toto, Jeff Porcaro, who's still one of my all-time favorites. I mean, I learned so much, still do, just from listening to those records. And even other records, like, you know, records that, you know, played on when he was 18 years old, like with Steely Dan. And you just go like, oh my God, to play with that type of confidence, maturity, and conviction when you're that young.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just mind-boggling to
it
me.
is. Yeah.
And then, of
he
course,
was that great.
all the classic rock guys like we were talking about. And then when it came to jazz, I really heavily got into Tony Williams. And he's probably still my all-time
Tony.
favorite.
Yeah.
Just
There's a drummer's drummer, to say
Yeah.
the least. So that's now you're really starting to get into like the most extreme combination of chops and musicality and genius that
absolutely.
like, people are still trying to unpack what Tony did, 50 years later.
his swing and just his dynamics and just his force was just it was just incredible.
Yeah.
Just that whole band, like especially Miles's quintet at that point in the early '60s with Herbie.
So, yeah.
Oh my God! I mean,
So you discover that, and now you're playing it. You're trying to play it and learn it, and
yeah. So
Yeah,
I was playing in
amazing.
jazz bands. I was in a few different big bands in my high school, and so that was my whole plan. I was going to move to New York City and be a jazz drummer.
okay.
And somewhere along the line, something went terribly wrong.
And so what is that? What happened? You left Sweden, and did you come to the States? Was that the next
So
step?
after high school, I mean, all along, I mean, this was the only plan. There was no plan B. This was all I was going to move, and I was going to be a musician somewhere in the U.S. And so after high school, I went to Los Angeles for the first time. I spent a summer here just because I'd sort of started to change my mind about moving to New York. Mainly because I started hearing about a lot of people moving from New York. Again, because unfortunately, of course, the jazz scene was just starting to take a little bit of a nosedive. And of course, housing prices in New York at the time, even back then, in the 90s when I moved, started to go.
Yeah.
So I decided to move to Los Angeles, but I went to visit first, and then I went back to Sweden and did 2 years of music college, and then I made my move to LA in 97.
And that was the jump. They're like, okay, I'm jumping in. You know,
It was sink or swim, you know,
Yeah.
at that point. Like, you know, people thought, of course, that I was crazy, you know, leaving my family and all
And
my
LA
friends.
is competitive, you know, for even the greatest drummers.
Yeah,
go
I
there
think you just have to
and-
have this blind, not just hope, but excitement and not even really think about all of that. You just have to do it because of it's like, there is, you know, this is what I'm going to do. I'll just figure it out. I didn't know
Right,
it
right.
really
You were
a single
committed.
person.
You were committed. There's almost a naivety you need to have
That's what I mean.
that
Yeah, because
you're-
if you
that
sit
you're
and
gonna-
overanalyze that shit,
then you'll just scare yourself out of doing it.
yeah, you probably won't move.
Yeah, but you did it, and you have to make that move. You know, jump in the net will appear is a philosophy that's necessary in order to really kind of take those big steps
Yeah.
in your life, and you did. That was a huge step. So, what happened when you got to LA?
Well,
New kid in town.
Yeah, you know, like most people, I just ran around to every single music venue, every club,
Okay.
just meeting people and, you know, finding different places where maybe they would have like an open jam night or something. You would get a chance to sit in. And so that, of course, led to that, you know, meeting some people and maybe someone needed something, you know, or they needed someone for, you know, for like a cover gig down by the beach or something. And I ended up doing that quite a bit. And
So you started to get gigs.
so what happened was, as a way to, not to get into immigration problems here, but in order for me to get into the country and be able to have a 1-year visa to basically get settled,
Sure.
I went to Cal State Northridge, which is a music college.
Okay.
I mean, it's a college, very famous college, but I got accepted into the jazz program. And I figured that would be a good place to start, just at least have somewhere to be and again, have a student visa.
Right.
And so, of course, at that point, studying wasn't the focus. That wasn't even really the point. It was about running around and meeting people and just to start some sort of network. And so after about 6 months or so, I actually had enough, you know, gigs lined up that I dropped out of Northridge and just started doing more and more stuff.
Just hitting the scene, gigging, and a lot of cover stuff, and just, you know, you were starting from scratch, which is
Yeah.
the hardest thing in the world to do. I started my career from scratch, and it was in Boston, which has a lot less of a scene than LA or New York.
Right.
Which is, you know, in some ways that's better, in some ways that's a lot more difficult. But either way, you're in LA, you're starting from the beginning. You don't know anybody there, right? Did you know anybody when you got there that kind of was also like from Sweden or from somewhere that you had crossed paths and like
No.
you could, no, so you didn't even have a
No.
friend there. And you start and you just kind of go to these jam nights, go to the clubs, the baked potatoes of the world
Yep,
in LA.
exactly.
and then just start to know people and realize that people liking you is as important as people wanting to play with you, right? So you have your drum chops and then you have your personality, and that combination in LA is a very big combination towards
Yeah,
success.
absolutely. And trust me, you know, some of these things I learned the hard way because you get there and you're so psyched, you're so excited. And the hardest thing in that situation is obviously to be patient.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah.
trust me, there's a lot of phone calls that I wish that I hadn't, you know, made where it's just like, you know, you're hounding people, you're very, very eager. And, you know, luckily I had some very, very nice people back then that was like, you know what? Just, you know, chill out a little bit. Because, you know, this is all about just, you know, getting to know people.
Let
you know,
some things happen
right.
as opposed to trying to be the pebble in every ripple. Like just send the pebble into the water and then
Sure.
the ripples will occur. Like there is some faith in this.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you learn that. That's a big lesson though.
Well, again, luckily, I had some people that sat me down pretty early on, like, listen, if you
They
want to
were
hang
helpful.
around here, and sort of make this your life, just let it happen. And it was almost like, yeah, once you realize that and took more of a back seat, it's like, oh, well, now more and more things started to come.
By being
But that's a
patient.
hard thing to do when you're 20 years old,
Yeah.
and you've
It's a hard thing to do when you're 50 years old.
yeah.
But it's patience is not easy
Oh my God,
when you're
yeah.
ambitious and you want to see things happen at your timing.
Sure. And
Not
I'm
the timing.
horribly impatient. I'm just horribly impatient. I'm getting better, but
So you had some good mentors and guidance early on. People
Yeah.
that liked you that said, "Hey, if you chill a little bit, it's actually going to serve what you're trying to accomplish as opposed to the other way around." And you listened. Which
Yeah.
was
Oh, absolutely.
That's hard to do as well. So especially when you're, trying to make things happen.
well, yeah, because I didn't really have any, guidelines. It was like I didn't really know how it worked. This is not a college course you can get, like, how to get into the music business in Los Angeles.
Right.
Like you literally just have to jump in.
Yeah.
And hopefully there's someone there to sort of show you the ropes.
And what's the first big break?
First big break?
When do things start to take the turn?
So I was lucky pretty early on. I was introduced to a gentleman named Barry Squire, who used to work for Columbia Records. He was an A&R person, I believe. But what he had started doing, record companies and, managements and all these different people that had signed on a new artist, they would call him when they needed a backup band to go on tour. So he became sort of the point person in town. Like, so-and-so gets signed to Sony Records. Now this person is going on tour and they need a touring band. I got introduced to him early on, and he started calling me for all these different auditions. And luckily I was able to get a lot of work through him that way. So I started touring pretty early on.
And who was the first one? The Barry.
The
or John?
first one was an artist named Jude, who was signed to Maverick Records. He was more of a folk pop singer, I guess.
Okay.
And that led to other people like Vanessa Carlton. This was an R&B singer named Ricky Fonte that was signed to Virgin. That was really, really great. So there were a lot of people like that had just gotten
So
signed.
you were busy now. Now you're working with
I was working my
signed
way up.
artists. Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's a big step.
the main thing was that I was able to make a living at it.
Right.
And so when you're asking what was the big break, I think it was at that point when I realized that I can actually, mind you, it was a lot cheaper to live in Los Angeles back then, but
Sure. But it was never cheap. So
No.
It was always challenging, especially from
Right.
scratch.
yeah.
What was the biggest lesson you learned and can apply from the auditions period where you were getting these gigs? What'd you do right? Because those auditions can be, they can be 20 drummers or more that try to get the gig.
Yeah, and sometimes they're all standing in line outside of the door, or sometimes even, in the same room.
That's a lot. That's
can be
really
super
uncomfortable.
stressful and
Yeah.
intimidating.
Sure.
Because some of these guys, and it's like, oh God, okay, here we go.
So how'd you do it then? Because you succeeded
you
in the face of that.
Well, first off, you have to make sure you just, no matter what, you have to learn the material very, very well. You never want to be in a situation where you feel like you're going in and you're going to second guess that you know the material, because there's so many other stressful factors that at least you should walk in with confidence, knowing that you know the material and that you feel confident about your playing. And then there are obviously, no audition is going to go down the same way. Not like there's one way of doing it. You can't really have that sort of attitude about it because, dealing with different personalities, you're dealing with different scenarios. Sometimes you show up and there's just a video camera and like a manager. Like the artist isn't there. There's no band. There's no one to play along with. You're just basically there as for for the camera to show what you look like and how you can play.
Yeah.
Like those are really, really weird.
Yeah.
So there were so many different scenarios to get used to. So the one common thing was obviously just make sure you know the material, feel confident when you walk in,
And you always had the material ahead of time. So it was on you to learn it inside and out and then go there and execute. That's what those auditions
I would say
were like.
95% of the time. Sometimes people just wanted the spontaneous reaction of you showing up and let's just jam and see how you react to our music and see how you can improvise, all of that stuff. But that wasn't very common. But
Most
I
of the
definitely
time,
I
they
had
gave
situations
you
like
a
that.
tape or a CD of like, here's the material.
Yeah.
And so you shed it. Did you write charts out?
If needed.
Okay.
Yeah, but they would just be simple, like intro, 8 bars, verse, 16 bars, pre-chorus, 4 bars.
Okay.
It's like,
Right. But a road
here's a
map.
break in the second chorus.
Right. Right. Okay. So but it worked. So that was really the secret to your approach was prepare, go in there and make sure that the music part of it is nailed. No matter what other dynamics are happening, the music part,
that has
nail.
to be first. And then, maybe there are other factors that you can't control. Certain things like, the rest of the band looks like this, and maybe you don't have that look that fits in. So maybe musically it was correct, but this is not really good.
But artistically, they were looking for a different vibe or whatever.
Yeah.
You joined Billy Idol in 2013 or 2012?
2012.
2012. So what happens between this Los Angeles evolution and Billy?
Again,
Billy?
a lot of touring, a lot of recording, playing with people like Donna Summer, Leanne Rimes, Cher. Again, going back to Barry, he was the one, may have been 22 at the time, auditioned for an artist named Nick Frost that Keith Forsey happened to produce.
Okay.
Nick wasn't signed yet, but I think he had a development deal with Keith, which meant that we were rehearsing a lot. We were writing a lot. We were recording a lot. We didn't actually do that many gigs. So it was very much sort of a development deal for all of us. And I became good friends with Keith. And then at one gig, I remember we had a sound check and he had mentioned that he had started to write some new material with Billy again because Billy had sort of taken a break for X amount of years.
And they worked together on Rebel Yell.
Well, even before then, like he's the one that discovered him back with Generation X.
Oh, okay. So he and Billy go way back.
Oh yeah, and Keith made basically all of his records up until early '90s or mid '90s.
Okay, so all the big hits were the
absolutely.
iconic hits, I'll say.
Yep. So after having that working relationship with Keith for probably a couple of years, he just announced, or asked me basically at a sound check, like, hey, you want to come in next week and do some tracks for Billy? Just record some demos. And I was like, oh my God. Like, yeah. And so that was the first time I met Billy. And then I would periodically get called in to just do some demos here and there. And then back in 2011, I believe, I had worked on a track that Keith was doing with Harold Faltermeyer and
Beverly Hills Cop.
Yeah, and Top Gun,
and Top Gun,
all of that stuff, all that big majestic stuff, right?
Yeah.
And Steve Stevens was the guitar player.
Oh, okay.
So that happened. And then I also got called in to re-record Rebel Yell and Dancing with Myself. And so those two things happened in the same year. And at the same time, it just didn't work out with the drummer that they had. And so I think, Keith was really pushing for like, well, here's your obvious choice then, And obviously I was a little bit older then because back in the day, like I was so young and I don't think I would have been ready to be, part of that band when I was that young. So luckily I got the call. And
was it an audition? Or was it more of an invitation?
I guess it was like a tour audition, because we had 3 or 4 dates. Like my first gig with them was in Moscow. It was just a quick one-off. And then we had a short West Coast tour. And I think that was sort of like, all right, let's see
how
if
it
this
works.
is- yeah.
Okay.
Because there's one thing, again, to sit down and be able to handle it musically, but then, you're going on the road. You want to see how you gel with everyone, and what your personality is like. And, what it's like when you're touring, like it's about to hang, So there are so many different factors that go into
chemistry.
it. Yeah, exactly.
And so obviously it gelled, right? Everybody was grooving and was got along
knock
great.
on wood.
Yeah,
It's
and that
been
was the
fantastic.
beginning. So that Moscow was the first gig, and you never looked back. So now you've played with Billy, 12 years and counting, and you have a new album. So tell us about the new album.
Billy has been signed to a deal where he was supposed to do 3 different EPs, 3 separate EPs. And he did 2 already. And this was supposed to be another EP, but I think the material just started flowing so well, and they were very, very happy with how everything came out. So he decided to do a full-length album. So we did the first half a little bit over a year ago down at Sunset Sound. And then we continued to tour around all of these recording dates. And then they went back in last summer, towards the end of the summer, and wrote the second half. And then we went back to Sunset Sound.
And you also have your own studio, right? So
You
did drums there or Sunset?
I did some of the drums up there. Yeah, we did the majority at Sunset, and then I did a few tracks up in my studio.
And
up in
what
the
do you think
mountains.
of the new record? You excited by it?
I'm very, very excited about it. I think the material is very, very strong. I think there's definitely something in there for everyone. The sort of old school hardcore Billy Idol fans that maybe expect one thing. And then, of course, now it's amazing to see so many younger people in the audience now.
Yeah.
And maybe they are more used to a certain pop sound. And there's definitely some of that on the new record as well. I just think the materials are very, very strong. And once you have that, first and foremost, the production and, instrumentation and all of that stuff becomes secondary. But
It's
I
all
think
about
we
the
have,
songs.
We have a very, very strong foundation.
And what is your favorite Billy Idol song to play? What do you love to play live? And why? There's
something undeniable about Rebel Yell because I literally still, it's going to sound a little silly, but I can still get goosebumps if I'm walking around or driving or whatever and Rebel Yell comes on the radio. Something happens to me. Like there's such force behind that track. And so that's an incredible song to play. Obviously, not just for me, but, seeing the audience.
Is that the show closer?
No.
Okay. But it's
No.
it's
one
of the top.
It's down there. It's down there towards the end.
What's the show closer?
It's usually White Wedding.
Okay, so that's the big anthem
Yeah.
that people love to. And do you have the same goosebumps on that, or is just something about Rebel Yell?
There's something about Rebel Yell. There's an evilness to it, and there's something about that groove when it kicks in. And all I can think about is Keith Forsey just manning the studio, because the way he is in the studio, he has such command. And there's something about that song when it kicks in, I can just see Keith in the studio, yes, we got it.
Wow, awesome. Wow.
But then there's another song from Charmed Life, which is a bit of I wouldn't call it a deep cut, but it's a song called Pumpin' on Steel, which I think is a great song. And it's a lot of fun as a drummer to play, because I can basically go a little bit bananas. That's the great thing too. Like Billy and Steve have never really told me not to play something. Like I can within
the
reason,
parameters,
of what's
but
appropriate.
they let you play.
Yeah, they do.
And so you're a Ludwig guy, right? So
Yep.
I want everyone to check out Erik's rig rundown with the drum rig rundown from Modern Drummer. We go over everything that you're playing and using live. But high level, it's Ludwig drums, cymbals.
Sabian cymbals, Vic Firth sticks, Remo heads, and then I have Canopus, the snare wires.
That you put on the acrolite?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. So the drums are the classic Maples, 26, 13, 16.
Any triggering?
No.
Okay. So check out the Modern Drummer rundown Erik Eldenius's rundown that we did, and there's a lot to unpack there. It's a straightforward kit, but there's still a lot of cool things happening, and the drums sound great. Like you played some cuts on the new record, of course, live. They just sound great. I mean, they sound like Billy Idol always had. And I'm sure some of this is Keith's production and, his approach to.
Oh, for sure. Because Keith was a drummer initially. So he was very drum
he's really
oriented,
into that sound,
groove oriented.
And the grooves are great, obviously. But the sound is too. Like they're big, but they still cut. They're not big like Led Zeppelin big. They're big like pop rock big.
Yeah.
And they, and that's the sound you get, which is not that easy to get, So what's the approach? Some of it you're playing, you're very backbeat, hold the groove down. You
have
play,
to be.
your drums sound big because of the way you play.
Well, thank you. I mean, for those songs and for that presentation in terms of how the instrumentation, like with two guitar players, one keyboard player, and we have some backing tracks that there's, it's a pretty heavily saturated wall of sound going on. So you just have to sort of drive that. You have to drive the train. You have to penetrate that somehow.
Right. And not overplay. But yet groove and drive it. And
a lot of it is pretty straightforward. And there's like no reason to reinvent the wheel in terms of those grooves. I mean, it's so well done on the records. But I mean, we definitely went through a few different drum kits, definitely different ways of tuning the drums. We've probably been through 10 different snare drums since I started. And yeah, we have been using this 6.5 Acrolite now for the past 2-3 years.
Are most of the snare drums you've gone through Ludwig? Are you a big Ludwig snare fan or just overall?
All of them have been Ludwig. I think we were in Australia or something, and we had a rental kit for some reason on one of the shows, and there was a snare drum. I think it may have been an old 80s Pearl snare drum or something that Steve just fell in love with. And he's like, can you just maybe buy that from them? So I was able to buy it from the rental company, and then we sort of tried that out for the rest of that tour, and then nothing really happened. So
yeah, back to Ludwig.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, your snare sounds great. On the new Billy Idol album, you recorded some of it in your studio. Yeah. So how did it come about that you have your own studio? What was that process like? So that's a different skill set than drumming, is putting a studio together. And in addition to that, is the studio available commercially? Do you do projects for people? Like they send you a song, you do drum tracks. Like give us a deep dive on your studio and what's it called?
So it's called Twin Pines Recording, and I do have a website, which is twinpinesrecording.com.
Okay.
People can check out if they want.
Twinpinesrecording.com. Check it out. And they'll send you tracks and you'll play on their record?
I would say that's 80% of the work that I do. People just email me tracks, and I do the remote thing. That was obviously during COVID. Mm-hmm. It was a lot of that. Mm-hmm. But that's also when I moved up to the mountains and built the studio to be, the purpose was to have it as a recording retreat because it's close enough to, LA is like an hour away. But it's very, very different. It's a very different environment. It's like you're up in the mountains in Colorado or something. So the idea, for people to get out of town, come up and spend X amount of days up in the mountains and make a record. So,
and if they can't get there, then they send you the tracks. So
right.
Either way, they either get a retreat or they at least get your playing and they get your sound.
Yeah, exactly. So that was definitely a massive learning curve. Just,
you did it on your own?
To build. No, I obviously hired people to do it, but I designed it.
You did.
So just to learn about, the actual construction.
Yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot
surfaces
of
and, non-parallel walls, blah, blah, blah.
Well, who was the studio guru that helped you? Since I know that I wasn't available when you called.
Yeah.
Who did you end up using?
There was no studio designer per se. I just asked around. I asked a lot of people, and I looked at a lot of YouTube videos. Mm-hmm. YouTube is your friend. And luckily, I had a very open-minded contractor that had never built a studio, but was super, super interested in the idea because obviously this is something that he had never done. And
But he was a good contractor if he can pull it off.
yeah,
'Cause
absolutely.
it's not easy. So you went out and sourced the studio glass, the studio doors, how to seal everything, how to get the live room to.
Yeah, the typical room within a room way of doing it, and then of course then acoustically how to treat the room and which areas to keep more live and which areas to keep more dead. All of that stuff is a constant learning curve, I think. But yeah,
It
so that
sounds
whole
great though, right?
I'm very, very happy with it,
Because
and
the pictures that you've shared with me,
yeah,
it looks like a very creative and pretty large space. Most live rooms aren't that big.
yeah, no, it's about 16 by 25, a tracking room.
Right? Yeah, that's a good size. Plus, you have your control room.
I have a control room which is
And an
quite
amp room.
large. Yep.
Yeah, so you've
Yep.
got you can pretty
Yeah, I
much.
can track a whole band
Yeah,
at the same time,
yeah.
which is
Which is
the
awesome.
main thing. So yeah, very, very super excited to have that because that's basically all I do when we're not touring. Either I play on people's records or I produce records or mix or a little bit of everything. But you were asking if it's open as a commercial studio. Not really. I mean, I'm
Right.
involved
You're
basically
not booking
in it.
time for someone who's looking for a day of studio time. You're collaborating.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
that's- and
people can
that's
just
your
hire me as an
place.
engineer if they
Right.
want to come in with a band and they could have a separate producer and all that stuff. I can just
Right.
be,
But
running the board.
a lot of what you're doing is it's all of what you're doing there is stuff that you're involved in some capacity.
Yeah.
What is the console? What's the board there?
So the board, when I say the board, it's just a control surface.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are you using?
It's an old Tascam 32 channel one. And it's just, again, it's just so nice to be able to push up faders and have panning and, all your sends and all that stuff and not have to stare into a screen. Like I don't even have my computer screen in front of me. I have it off to the side because I just want to be able to, use my ears, listen.
Right.
And that's something that I, sometimes get, sort of lost these days.
It's true.
Yeah.
And I heard the drum sounds you got there. They're on the Billy record, the new one, and other stuff that you've played for me. And the drum sounds are fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
great. And that's the room, that's the Ludwig, kit that you have there. You're playing, of course, and use an outboard mic pre's.
Yep. I have a whole bunch of different ones. Each is sort of tailored to, each source, whether it's the snare drum or the kick drum and
Yeah,
obviously what kind of microphone you're using.
Yeah,
So
and that's a big part of that with the room is going to get the sound that you
Yeah.
want. That's
absolutely.
fantastic. So twinpinesrecording.com.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we got to check it out. And that's congratulations on your
Yeah,
studio.
thank you so
and,
much.
And all that you're doing with it.
Thank you.
So Erik Eldenius, Billy Idol, on the road, new album. You'll be out with him for a while. I mean, you guys are touring basically every year, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much all the time. So I hope, please get out there, see Erik play with Billy. Obviously, it's a great show, great drumming, great songs, just a lot of fun, and just a great time. So continued success. Thank you for joining us on the Modern Drummer Podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much,
Thank you
David.
very much, my man. I'm David Frangioni. This is Erik Eldenius, and we'll see you next time on the Modern Drummer Podcast.